There's like 62 people, it says here, but not here, which is odd. I don't know if people can see us. Tell us if you can see us.
There's the right broadcast.
Seems to like not be working. I don't know why or what to do about it. But then that's gonna give it a wrong. I think we are live now. Okay. Yes, we are live now.
Oh.
Apologies for that.
Oh, how strange.
That was odd. Yes. Anyway.
Well, I guess in the recording you can watch later how 3 minutes we were trying to figure out why it's not showing on the screen.
Well, it wasn't showing on my phone anyway. But anyway, I think you can all see us now. Just say it says, I see 2 human beings. I have to assume.
Good.
Yes, we can see it. Good.
Okay, nice.
Okay, let's start that again.
Oh no.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
This may be the second time you're listening to this intro, in which case, apologies.
And if you're watching this in a recording, this is going to appear very strange.
Depending on when the recording started, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are here right now, joined by senior developer Michael, who you may be familiar with from our Friday live streams. Yes, he joins us to code. But today, we're not coding, no, we're talking about code. Why? Because yes, we have over the years come to realize that the tech world can be quite baffling when it comes to the lingo. Lots of people ask us, how can you learn all of those acronyms and so on? What does this mean? What does that mean? I'm sure we've all looked at a job ad and thought, what language is this actually written in? Well, we're here to clear a few things up because it's a very common complaint. We hear from people joining the tech world, so we want to clarify things a bit. Yes, Michael here, you can think of as your living, breathing, coffee drinking dictionary.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes, we're going to discuss why is tech so full of jargon, how to deal with a phrase you don't understand, for example, in a meeting, and how to make the language of the tech world easier to manage. Plus, we'll be going through a few seemingly random tech phrases I've collected to clarify them for you. But we do these things live so you can ask the things you want to know. So if you've got a question, just pop it in the chat or any other kind of thought as well. Yes, thank you all for coming along. Brilliant to see you all here. Michael, with your tan. According to Alex.
Is it?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, well.
Brilliant.
It's been good summer in Wales, so there we are.
Yeah. So let's kick off with the most important burning question, which is, why is tech so full of jargon?
I think it's just like any other professional field, to be honest. You know, people just tend to use their own words for describing different things, and I think it's like wherever you go, you know, you go to some kind of factory or something, like mechanical engineers use a lot of their own jargon, and then doctors use their own, and so on. So I would imagine that it's probably not any different to like most other professional fields. So yeah,
I think the difference might be that new jargon comes along more often, because in the medical field, yeah, there are medical advancements and things, but I don't think they come along, I could be wrong, as often and as varied and as obscure, perhaps,
yeah, I guess,
in tech.
Yeah, there is a lot of like inventing new technologies and stuff, and it kind of enters vocabulary very quickly. Yeah, I suppose like React now is a very well-known technology, and it's not that old by the measures of like inventions in general. So yeah, I suppose it's kind of like, because there's always the churn in different names for different things and techniques and stuff. So yeah, maybe there is. But again, it's a very hyper quickly evolving field. So it's inevitable that people will get more and more new words to describe something that they're doing.
Perhaps also with other fields like law and medicine, as an example, those kind of words do sometimes creep into everyday vocab. So you sort of understand what these things are, or at least have a vague concept. Whereas with tech, I don't think you would necessarily do that. Like, I mean, it's difficult because we've been in tech for so long now. We maybe do use them together, but you wouldn't with someone who's not in tech.
Yeah, but also tech uses a lot of military, sports vocabulary, and it's kind of, and engineering, quite a lot of engineering vocabulary as well. So, if you're transitioning from some of the fields, it could be somewhat familiar to you because the context that those words are used in are very similar.
It could be, but then you get words like tree shaking, which is
right. But I mean, I don't know. I always found that one very self-explanatory.
What does it actually mean while we're here? Tree shaking.
So I think that's referring to like in front-end bundles. It's referred to like when you have a lot of different code that might not be used by your code base. So instead of shipping literally everything, so you import a module, like let's say moment or some other module, and it has a lot of different methods that might not be completely used by your code base. So what it does is like it tries to just keep the things that your code is using and eliminate everything else. So I feel like tree shaking is a very good metaphor here, because like you shake the tree and the fruits fall off and the tree is on your left. So kind of like, you're trying to get rid of stuff that you can get rid of.
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, it always made sense to me. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But maybe it is a bit actually confusing.
Well, the thing is, you grew up around a lot of fruit trees.
Yes.
For those of us that didn't, it's like, why would you do that? Yeah. The other one I like is bike shedding. Tell us about that.
Oh, I think bike shedding actually goes from, that's been coined in, I think the guy's name is Parkinson's or something. There was a book that was describing how a nuclear power plant was built. And it was effectively this like little, the author noticed this particular case where while discussing how to build nuclear power plant, people were kind of not particularly engaging in the very tricky aspects of the building of a power plant. But when it came to which color to paint the bike shed where the employees are parking their bikes, it seems like that generated an awful lot of discussions. So kind of like bike shedding is now just referring from that, kind of carrying on from that book, it was like taken over by tech people to use, to just refer to inconsequential discussions that are very heated. So in the grand scheme of things, the color of the bike shed on a nuclear power plant has literally very, very little impact. And it's the most discussed disproportionately.
So it's the phrase for when you end up over discussing a basically
something very inconsequential to the life of the project. Yes.
Brilliant. Let's move on to my next question, which is, how can you deal with tech jargon which you don't understand in general, but also, especially if you find yourself in a situation where everyone's talking about something and you don't know what it is?
I think it's, like currently what I'm doing is I just ask what it means. I think it's very...
Sounds wise.
I think it's very important to... especially like in tech nowadays, people are a little bit more welcoming to newcomers. So if somebody is not quite aware of what something means, it's important to just say, can we just clarify that? Or can you explain what this acronym means? Or something like that. If you feel like a little bit not quite sure what people are talking about, you can probably just quickly write it down what it means. But nowadays, like most people work from home. So while the meeting is going on in Zoom, you can actually literally just Google what it means. So you won't need to ask the question about it. But I think asking directly is quite good way. You can just say like, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't quite catch what was that term? What does it mean? And then you'll get very quick TLDR. But if people it's also a very good point that if people can't explain what a particular word means, then probably they don't quite understand what it means themselves.
Yeah.
So maybe, maybe nobody knows what in the meeting. It's like one of those cases when you sit in a classroom and everyone is like pretending that they understand everything. And then if somebody asks that question, you just think, oh, thank God somebody asked that.
Yeah, no,
so you could be that person who would be thanked by literally everyone in the meeting asking the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you might realize, as you say, that the people talking about it also don't know what it actually is. So then you can ask the question of, should we really be doing this if no one knows what it is?
Yeah.
Brilliant. On to a wider question. How can we understand or manage the world of tech language? What I mean by that is there an easy way to approach getting your head around all these different phrases?
I think kind of yes and no. I've seen some people create like vocabularies on GitHub and stuff, like what some terms mean, and you can probably come across them. I suppose if you give a read to a couple, you can probably understand pretty much majority of what's out there. I probably wouldn't keep one myself, and I never did. It kind of never quite made sense. I suppose it depends on how comfortable you are with acquiring new words in general. Like, if people start using a language that you're not familiar with, how comfortable are you with acquiring it? And if you feel uncomfortable around new words, then maybe you should try to keep some kind of vocabulary. But generally, I always found it fairly easy to pick up a new word or something, what it means, and I know I quite kept a dictionary. Also, it's kind of very bound by what you're getting involved in. So if you're getting into front end or back end and stuff, then you will go down a particular path of trying to figure out what all the different words mean. Yeah, have a Google, play around, and always ask questions about what does it actually mean. Quite often you will find that, like for example, with terms like API, there is a distinction, there is a definition what it means, but you will see that different people mean different things, and it kind of changes meaning depending on the context. So a lot of terms are also very context specific.
Yeah, and there might also be some which are specific to your company. So they might they might name a meeting something strange.
Like people sometimes say like API endpoint, that means one thing, and then sometimes people say this library has a nice API, which is very different to API endpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually used to have a glossary, I suppose you'd call it, of words I picked up and acronyms and things. I struggle to remember things if I don't write them down. So if you're like me,
there you go.
I'd recommend doing that. Yes. If there are any words or phrases which have confused you in the past, or maybe now, let us know in the chat. We would love to go over them. Yes. You may be wondering why some people are putting tigers into the chat.
Yeah.
Allow me to explain. We have a tradition here where if you're new, please put a bunny rabbit emoji into the chat. And if you've been before, hit me with that tiger. We don't use this information. It's just for fun. Yes, hopefully all the tigers will come rolling in now, like Gina. Thanks for coming along. Yeah. Wow. Now, that's an interesting question from Chrome Chef. Chrome Chef is saying, in the restaurant world here in the US, we use heard or we chef or yes chef to tell our boss that you understand and will do what's asked. Is there a tech equivalent?
Interesting. I would say that I've heard people do the same in restaurants in the UK as well. I think it's kind of a restaurant jargon thing. Just this, like, speak French a bit, oui chef. I don't know if there is something similar in tech. I know that it's kind of a bit of a cliche. If somebody asks you to do something, you reply with, put it in a ticket. I suppose That would be,
Really?
yeah, that would be probably the closest that I can think of right now. Yeah, and the ticket is basically kind of from the systems for like tracking tasks. Like each task that needs to be done is called a ticket. Actually, I don't quite know why is it called a ticket? Why is it not called something else? But there's always something else. Because I would imagine that, normally all the task boards, they use Post-it notes. So why is it called a ticket and not Post-it? Maybe there is something from the 80s or 70s. There must be something. But yeah, it's quite interesting because once you try to delve into the language that people use, you always found these very exciting life events that occurred and some quite interesting piece of trivia that influences the language. So yeah, like for a language geek like us who used to teach the language, it's always fascinating to discover something like that. Like while I was trying to discover why do people say bike shading, it's a very random term to use. And then I came across this beautiful book that was fascinating to read. So yeah, there you go. Maybe there is something like that, but I'll have to think about, is there equivalent of we chef in tech? I'm not sure.
Thought-provoking question, though. Dallas says, some jargon has funny names, like DDoS from the 90s, called Pepsi. I don't know what that means, do you?
No.
A type of DDoS called Pepsi? But anyway.
Called Pepsi. Not sure.
I'm glad you brought DDoS up, because that was something I wanted to talk about.
Yes. So,
what is DDoS or DOS?
So DOS is denial of service. So basically, DDoS is a type of attack where if you're trying to prevent somebody from using a service, you can try to overwhelm it so nobody can use it. So think about it like, if you don't want people to see a particular film in the cinema, you can try to prevent people from entering the cinema, or like try to, I don't know, burn down the cinema or something. So like hack a website too. Right. But that might not work. So what you might do is you can ask as many friends as you can to buy all the tickets to that cinema, and then sit in the cinema so no one can enter and watch that film. So that would be the equivalent of a DDoS attack. You basically overwhelm a website by such an extent that all the requests that are being served, you have already taken all of that capacity. So the server is serving you and your bots and stuff, your network that you're trying to request everything from. And then somebody else who's trying to get some information from that server cannot be served by it because it's wasting all of the energy on you. So that would be what DDoS attack is. Basically, usually people use like botnets and stuff to, there are like printers that are connected to the internet, fridges or just laptops and stuff that people are not using. Or it could be quite well coordinated where people kind of voluntarily agree all together to use, they pick a target and then they go just hammer the website. Sometimes you can accidentally DDoS yourself. For example, lots of people, on your local machine or something, you can write a while loop for a very long request. So you'll create a node server or something, or a website that you have on your own local machine. And a particular request takes quite a long time. And you have accidentally put it on an infinite loop, and then your browser can crash. So you effectively have DDoSed yourself with too many requests. So it can happen.
Is an infinite loop a DDoS then?
No, it could lead to a DDoS. So if you have a request that takes a long time, and there is always a limited amount of how many requests a website can serve. So if you exceed that number, you have effectively DDoSed a target or yourself.
Whoops.
It can happen, especially on local developments where it's a little bit more likely that you can accidentally do something like that. Yeah. Or for example, you've entered a particular piece of code leads to some kind of while loop. And it takes just a little bit longer. And if you hit that code path again and again and again, you will lead to the website going down.
Interesting. Jorge is asking what distributed means.
well, like in trying to think how to not explain the word distributed using the word distributed.
In what context would you find
like,
it?
are you talking about distributed services or like distributed servers, networks, that kind of stuff? Like, what's the...
Well, let's go with servers.
Yeah, well, distributed services is usually referring to kind of a lot of different computers in a lot of different places. So everyone can be doing different computation at different point. So sometimes you can have problems with distributed computation of how to synchronize some of the data access and so on. So, but again, it's all like specific because the word is a bit too broad to narrow it down.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But generally, it basically means in lots of different places.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes, though, that kind of brings me to an interesting point. These tech words can seem quite complicated, but they're actually quite literal. Like,
yes.
my favorite example is sometimes people on Twitter say, I've been wondering all this time what this means in JavaScript, but it means
literally
this.
means this.
Yeah. Sometimes they are deceptively simple, I think.
Yes.
Totally. Good. Are there any phrases which you wish you knew sooner?
Interesting. No, probably not, because a lot of the time, different words, well, I would say concepts, you learn them when you are presented with some problem where you have to learn them. So, you know, if you learn it, if you just open the dictionary and start reading words, most of the time you won't really remember anything because, you know, like how often do you use really obscure words that you just read in the dictionary and haven't tried to use it? So most of the time people remember something because they had to use it or they heard someone use it and they had to understand what it means. But
you only see it in context, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But context-less words and terms, they are not particularly helpful. Well, unless you're, I don't know, trying to like fake it till you make it or something. But no, I would say probably not.
Asad is asking, could we simply go and learn the terms and their meanings like we would prepare for an algorithm question, for example?
I would probably recommend against it. Like learning terms on its own has very limited usefulness. Like, what's the point of you like learning load balancing as a word if you're not going to learn it as a concept? So I think from an interview point of view, especially for junior roles, that's the kind of question you get, isn't it? Like, what's load balancing? So it's mostly all about trying to learn the concepts behind it. Probably there is a point of like so occasionally, when you're trying to prepare for your first job, there's very limited, kind of conceptually very limited amount of stuff that you're going to be presented with. So sometimes it is useful to just open some kind of book that covers a bit broader of all the various problems that you might face, to just learn a little bit about them. So when you're presented with something like, for example, you have multiple servers that do the same thing, and there is one request, who's going to serve that request? And then you're going to be like, oh, I remember reading something about that. It was something about balancing. And then hopefully that will help you out. So yeah, occasionally it is useful to just kind of read up on the wider world, shall we say, about what's feasible and possible out there. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, I think it's worth looking at Googling something like common junior developer interview questions. And
so instead of learning the answer, like how to correctly answer that question, you should probably read the answer to that question and then read up on the concepts that are in that answer. And that will serve you much better than just memorizing the memorizing of the answer.
Can you remember your interview for the junior role that you got?
It was mostly a question like what motivates you, why do you want to be a developer, that kind of stuff. I think there were some basic questions like what's an array, what's a dictionary.
What is a dictionary?
Well,
in the tech sense.
Yeah, you just explain like I remember at the time I was doing Python, so I just said it's like a JSON object in Python, which is okay. Now I know that's not quite correct answer, but if you just say
Close
like
enough.
it's a key value data structure,
Is it?
that is kind of the more appropriate correct. But again, there are caveats. So kind of people ask these questions that there are different levels of correctness how to answer them. So if you asked people what's a Python dictionary and they have 10 years of experience in Python, then you would have very high expectations than asking a person who is looking for their first job. So luckily for me, I was looking for my first job and they said, yeah, that's fair enough. So they're not expecting you of as many caveats to this answer.
Yeah. But if you do know some,
you should definitely mention it, yeah.
See, I wonder about this because occasionally I answer a question and I'm like halfway through and then I think, oh, I think I've been talking for too long.
You should probably answer at the beginning, ask at the beginning, like how deep into this subject should we go? So I can like higher level, here is a very simple explanation of what it means, and here is slightly more complex. Do you want me to go further down into this? And if the interviewer is really perceptive, they would say, yeah, definitely go as far as you want with this topic. Then you can just go ahead.
Cool. Lovely. Thank you for the question there, Asa. John Paul is wondering about hydration.
Again, in what concept, in what context are we talking about? Because I think hydration
data usually, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes in terms of hydrating data, that usually means that, for example, if you receive a particular bit of data, and then well, for example, I would say I have family members stored in a database, and I know that, I don't know, like, for example,
you're treating them okay.
Yeah, Leanne is number one. So I know that if a request comes in with ID number 1, I can then hydrate that request with saying ID number 1, name Leanne, favorite pet cats, that kind of stuff. And I can add extra details to that request. So usually that's what hydration refers to. Basically, you have some bit of information about something, and then you go somewhere else, pull up lots more detail, and you add to that request and forward it on.
Oh, good. Thank you for clearing that up. Now, Jorge is also wondering about Scrum, Jira, Agile.
I love how they're used with slashes. So it's like, they usually go hand in hand, which quite often they do. Yeah, they do. Like in enterprises, well, another like tech jargon, enterprise, which is usually is just a very, very big company, very big customer who can spend a lot of money on your software. That's what basically enterprise most of the time means.
So what do these things mean then? We got Scrum, we got Jira, we got Agile. Can you clear those up?
A lot of the time, for example, if you take a very big company like something like IBM or Oracle, or historically very large, or like some really big car manufacturers like Mercedes or BMW, that kind of stuff. A lot of the time, how they love processes, and in those processes, people are trying to also create. How do you create software? So the way for creating software kind of gone through the manufacturing line analogies. So people thought, like we manufacture stuff, like cars and stuff. So we have our manufacturing line. So what if we tried to manufacture software in a very similar way? And that's how they were, for example, came up with all the different tickets. For example, Kanban is a word coming from Toyota manufacturing. Shall we say, Toyota manufacturing process. So Kanban was just a board where you would link things where they are in the process. So for example, they're prepared to be shipped, or they are prepared to be assembled, or we're waiting for parts, that kind of stuff. So from the very simple like assembly point of view, people were kind of going further in, and they were trying to say, can we now organize ourselves into some other ways? So Scrum and Agile is usually used with a slash because Scrum is like a way of trying to organize people to do work in more or less predictable, manageable way. And Agile basically says that we can do that, but we also have to stay agile to be able to respond to new demands, new requirements, and to be able to change our course accordingly. So software development is not like, here is the stuff that you need to do, and that's it. Like, let's ignore everything until it's done. And Jira is basically, it's just a product for, think of like Asana, Trello. It's basically a software that helps you manage tasks and boards and things like that. And a lot of people utterly despise and hate it. It does.
I've never actually used it. Let's have a look at it.
In a lot of developer communities, Jira is kind of a butt of all jokes. It's.
Have you used it?
Yes, I have.
And do you hate it?
I will not comment
Okay.
in public.
Unfunk your workflow, not wordplay. Getting
So you
to
can see that it's like there are also all sorts of different ways of like it's super customizable, and it's kind of its own. It's a plus and a negative at the same time, because it's a really complex piece of software, and a lot of the time people find themselves battling with what they have created because the flows are so overcomplicated. Kind of like, think about it like Excel spreadsheet. Everyone probably seen a very convoluted Excel spreadsheet where you're like, it feels like it's much easier to bin it and create something from scratch than actually try to figure out what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
People oftentimes get to that point with Jira.
Really?
Yeah. It's very, very flexible, and a lot of the time that's a downfall.
But it ends up being unmaintainable, basically.
Yeah, so it's very customizable piece of software. It's very customized, basically, task board.
Interesting.
With lots of things on top.
Going back to Scrum and Agile.
Yeah.
Former Scrum Master here. It's true. Yeah. Broadly speaking, to give you an overview, Scrum is a method of organizing your employees to work.
Yes.
And it can look different from company to company, but generally you have sprints where you aim to complete large pieces of work within a time frame, typically 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you usually have various sets of meetings, a daily catch-up meeting to talk about what you've done, any blockers you've got, what you're going to do the next day. And then you'll have sometimes a sprint update meeting at the end of each week. And at the end of the sprint, you have a retro, which is where you talk about what went well, what we can do differently next time, and so on.
I would say like the difference is obviously, I would say that Agile is a philosophy. It's just generic. There is this thing called Agile Manifesto where there are like 10 commandments or something. It was written a very long time ago by, quite frankly, actually quite nowadays quite famous contributors to software in general.
Here it is.
So if you just Google a lot of these names, there's a lot of really cool work done by these people. So at some point, they basically decided that there should be some kind of guiding principles to how to build software. And it's been translated into many languages.
Different languages.
But generally, it's very kind of vague enough to you can do literally anything and call it Agile, because it's vague enough to be able to do that. And Scrum is a more of an approach to try to do Agile, which is sometimes they kind of go, on job descriptions they go Scrum/Agile. But then again, I've never seen two companies that do these things the same way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like cooking, It's like everybody eats, but pretty much everyone does it differently.
Yes. Let's move on to some other questions. We have, it's a comment actually. Nick Dixon, new software developer here, hoping to break into tech this year. This is helpful. Good. Loves the Scrum community.
Oh, nice.
Coming along. Yes. Gideon is asking, is it a good idea for a junior developer to start learning architecture and patterns? Which brings me to a question. What is web architecture for starters? And then, do you need to know it to become a junior developer?
Interesting. I would say it would be quite helpful to just kind of understand, because architecture generally refers to there is a common set of problems that people encounter, and what is the most common approach to solving these problems. So for example, if you have a UI and you need to reach to the database to get some data, then we already have kind of a very common architecture of like front-end, back-end database. So then it kind of goes into way more complicated things, and what people normally mean by patterns. It also depends on the context, like coding patterns or architecture patterns. So yeah, I would say probably helpful to just be aware of it. Depending on the language, patterns obviously change. So for example, if you just Google code architecture patterns, you'll probably get a lot of like C#, Java examples. And a lot of the patterns might not be applicable to your coding language. Like JavaScript might not support some of them. Some of the patterns are, for example, applicable to typed languages, and some patterns would not be that useful. Like, for example, dependency injection is used mostly in typed patterns, in typed languages. So in JavaScript, it's quite hard to achieve that. And then, like with TypeScript, it's a little bit probably easier, but I'm just gonna gloss over the rest of that part. But yeah, I would say it's useful to be aware of them. And then when we come to web architecture in general, like how to build certain architectures for backend services and stuff, it's also useful to learn more and more. But I'm not gonna lie, nobody expects you to know that from junior developer, or like even software engineer who are looking for their first role or even second role.
Good to know.
Yeah, if you're just aware of the most common things like client and
server.
Like client server, yeah, that's probably more than enough for you.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Going back to Jira, Assad says, it reminded me of this. Jira sounds funny because Jira is Hindi for cumin seeds.
Huh, interesting. I think it has something to do with Godzilla, I think.
Godzilla?
Yeah, originally it was...
Really?
Yeah, it's got some very funny history. Why is Jira called Jira? And there is like some history about it that I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because like in Japanese it's like gojiru or something. So somebody thought they
knew what they were making.
Yeah, they either liked the film or something and they just named it after it, or yeah, basically.
Or they thought my Jira boards look like a Godzilla, so I'm going to go with it.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. Good question here from Michael. Not super specific, but when I first started coding, people referred a lot to Git terms and repos a lot, and it just seemed really vague. I can relate to this. When you first get started with Git,
yes,
all of the words, they're not the most intuitive, in my opinion, and you can't really figure out what they mean from the words themselves. Yeah. How do you get your head around that?
Like repositories, branches. I think the most intuitive one is the cherry pick. I don't know why. I just quite quickly got on the term. But also, well, because mainly in English it's the same term, right? To cherry pick means to like very selectively take something.
I've never heard it in a Git context though.
Oh really? Oh, okay. Yeah, there is a command. There is a command git cherry pick.
Really?
So yeah.
And what does that actually do?
Well, it takes one commit and brings it over to your branch.
Really?
Yeah. It's like you give a hash of a commit, and it basically takes that commit and puts it right where you are. So it cherry picks it.
There you go.
Yeah,
it's cherry pick.
Yeah, it's super straightforward and self-explanatory. But yes, I think with Git mostly, if you just follow a couple of tutorials and try to understand what each of the terms refers to. So it's kind of like learning with the mechanics, like you were not born knowing what a bonnet is in a car or what a wheel is. At some point you came across a car and people told you this is a wheel, this is a car, this like a windscreen, windscreen wipers, and then you eventually learned them by also using them. So I would say that you should probably try to do a couple of tutorials to get a little bit more used to this whole thing. Yeah, But repos, I've heard people like mishear repos and call them repros, and some people get bugged by that. But honestly, I think it's fine. It's all right. Like whatever you call it, repository. Although some people don't quite like because it sounds a bit medical.
It does a bit, yeah. I have a suggestion for those of you learning the Git process at the moment. That is to use GitHub Desktop. No shame. Yes, we have recently added into the front-end developer career path here some more material on Git where we're using GitHub Desktop.
Yeah, people usually advise to use like command line and stuff, but I feel command line
makes it 10 times harder.
It makes it quite harder, and it also makes it a little bit hard to visualize what's going on. While if you're using desktop to kind of just map the concepts in your head, so you have some visualization, it will make it a little bit easier later down the line to then switch to command line while having the concepts visualized very vividly.
That's exactly what the teacher who created these paths, and name is Treasure. Treasure said that using Git Desktop really helps you to map out in your mind what's going on. When I use desktop, I feel like it's less dangerous than the command line. It might not be. What do you think? Because you can do terrible things with the command line unintentionally, but with desktop I feel like the buttons are there because it's expecting you to press them, so it's not going to have a delete the whole code base button or something.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, that's true. With some commands, if you kind of mistype it in some way, or like put the wrong number, it might revert. Instead of one commit, it might revert like 50 commits by accident.
This is what I mean. So, but you can't really do that with desktop, can you? I mean, I'm not saying it's foolproof, but I feel like the chances are
I haven't used desktop enough to kind of remember correctly if you can or not. But look, if you set me a challenge, I'm sure I can mess stuff up.
Yes. Right. I go on to another one now, which is null versus undefined.
That's a very JavaScript specific. So yeah, generally programming languages have different ways of trying to tell you that something is not quite something doesn't exist as much as a value. So for example, if you're creating a number, obviously you assign it to a particular value, but then different languages pick different ways to tell you that some variable is not a part of a value. So for example, the way I like to remember it myself is that undefined means the variable is created, but value has not been assigned. While null, it's the very explicit absence of value. So undefined is mostly like somebody forgot something, while null, it's very explicitly nothing.
So the variable doesn't exist?
No, variable exists, but it's assigned to nothing.
As opposed to?
Well, as opposed to some value, like 5 or 10 or some string of a name or something else. While undefined, it's like it exists, but it's...
So what does it actually look like in code is what I'm asking.
Well, for example, if you type like let and then you type the variable name. So by default, it will be undefined.
Here we are.
Yeah, so if you go to JavaScript, right, and you just type in
let undefined.
No, because that's a keyword. So let un, why not? Or,
I've been doing React today, so that's right.
Oh,
I'm undefined.
Okay, equals. No, just put semicolon, and then just console log the value.
Right. Drum roll. Undefined. Okay.
So there you go. You haven't made it anything. But now if you say let I'm undefined equal, no, just on the first line. No, on the first line, you can now say equals null.
Well, now it's not going to be I'm undefined.
Yeah, now
No,
you
it's
have
not.
made it explicitly something. Now you have made it explicitly empty.
Yep.
So here you have created it, and by default, it's like, what is it? It's undefined. Think of undefined as like a question. Like, what should it be? I don't know.
Let I'm null equals null.
Yes, but when you assign something to null, it's explicitly nothing. And sometimes it is useful to return explicitly nothing in code. So sometimes you want to say, like, this is, that's it. Like, this is nothing. You know, it's like 0 in a number, you know. Sometimes you don't want to have a value. Sometimes you want to represent that something is 0. Like, if you go to a supermarket, you know, how would you indicate that there are no tomatoes? So you would say, you know, we have 0 tomatoes. We have nothing.
So is null the same as 0 then?
It's kind of to indicate value. But if you set 0, that means numerical value. But null is like a coding way of saying it's nothing as a concept. You know, so 0 is mathematical way of saying it, but null is more of a computer way of saying it.
So it could be null when it's any data type. The result could be null.
Yes, because if you say 0, that is a number. And if you put that in quotes, it could be 0 as a string, and so on. So you see, like 0 is a good concept, but it becomes a little bit wobbly. So people have come up with something a little bit more explicit. And it could be null, nil, and so on. But for example, people say that, I think the creator of JavaScript said that undefined was the biggest mistake he's made with JavaScript. He shouldn't have allowed it. So some languages, for example, they don't have undefined value. I think Go basically has nil, and that's it. So there is no difference between null and undefined like in JavaScript. Go just has one value, that's it.
So what difference does it actually make then if something ends up being undefined or null?
So I would say that if you get null as a result, then somebody has gone to an effort of telling you some piece of information that this doesn't exist. Whatever you're trying to get, it's not accidental, that it's nothing. While if you get undefined, it could be accidental. It could be that you've done something wrong and it's not quite there.
I've done things in code though, and then I'm expecting whatever result, and then it gives me null, which I'm definitely not expecting.
Well, that could be on like compiler level or browser level or something to show you that this has to be null.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So, oh, yes, that is a very good point. I've just console log null, so obviously it's given null. But just to confirm, console log I'm null also does that. Thank you for pointing
Yeah, but
that out.
JavaScript is a quirky language, so there are a lot of different, you know, there are some assumptions that you make as learning just computer science in general, and then JavaScript is a little bit different. Like if you Google a talk called WTF JavaScript, there will be a lot of people will show some quirks that you should probably be aware of. Yeah, so there are like there's a whole website dedicated to it.
Oh wow, look at this.
There you go.
Look at this.
Yeah.
That is actually interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Something to check out after the stream.
It's quite useful because, especially when it comes to comparing some values, people expect certain things, but it might not be the way they expected because of some historical reasons.
Undefined can be defined.
Yes.
Yes,
exactly.
Interesting. Yes. Mohammed says, if the browser tells us that the value of a variable does not exist, it will give us undefined. Yeah. So like this, we've got the variable.
Yeah, but we haven't assigned it to
doesn't
anything.
have a value.
So it just says, I'm undefined. Because basically, read undefined as I have not been defined yet. There you go.
Or, and if one JavaScript dev wants to tell another one that a value is not defined, he will write null.
Yeah, so if I want to be super explicit to the receiver of my value, that it's nothing. I will not leave it as undefined. I will say no. Yeah.
So really, if one dev wants to tell another dev that the value
doesn't exist,
yeah,
I will write no. Yeah, because if you try to say it is not defined, then it becomes linguistically in English, it becomes a little bit awkward to say that.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Philosophical questions.
Yeah.
I'm just reading through these. Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Nice. Undefined versus null chat.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's move on to the next one. Web apps versus mobile apps. What are they?
So again, it's one of these things that people argue a lot about. What are web apps? What just apps in general? But I would say, if you're looking for a first job, very quick distinction is web app is something that runs in your browser. So it's
like Scrum.
So like Scrum, for example.
Like this.
Yeah. So if you go to Chrome or Safari or I hope not Internet Explorer, but and you type something into the page, and it's not like a simple page that lists things. So for example, you go to Airbnb, that would be a web app. If you go to Airbnb on your mobile phone, that would be a mobile app. But if you open Chrome and go to a page,
that was my next question.
That's a web app.
Interesting. So what are people?
That's a responsive web app.
What are people arguing about then? Because that seems fairly straightforward.
Well, yeah, but there are also there are kind of like all the in-betweens, because to run a mobile app, you sometimes have to write it in in Kotlin or Java to run on Google, and you have to write it in Objective-C or Swift to run on Apple. So sometimes what people do is there are like frameworks that it looks like you're pressing the button on your phone to open an app like Airbnb, but what it actually is just an icon that is a shortcut to your browser that then opens a page inside that looks like a mobile app, but actually it's a web app.
Is there a word for those?
No, people just call them mobile apps because they're on your phone.
No.
Yeah. So that's basically what people argue. You then kind of get into this gray area where it's a web app but kind of masking as a mobile app, and there is an argument what constitutes that. But generally, like I try not to get involved into these things.
But what makes a mobile app if it's made in Objective-C or?
So if I in my head, if I click it on the icon on my phone, and it opens some program on it, it's a mobile app. If I do it in my browser, it's a web app.
But the ones that are masking you,
I still call it a mobile app.
Interesting.
Yeah, and oftentimes a lot of people, like especially people who write these frameworks, they also refer to them as mobile apps.
Wesley asks, what if I'm just walking around with my laptop?
Well, that's still web app, because it's not, your laptop is not your mobile phone. But then, well, here's the thing: is like on an iPad, is an iPad a small laptop or a really big phone?
The eternal question. Ignacio is wondering, how hard is it to transition from web apps to mobile apps, being a programmer?
Right. So normally, like web apps on the front end, for example, you would write them in JavaScript, or some other languages in their frameworks. Like, for example, C# used to have Xamarin, that kind of stuff. So you can write both mobile and web apps in C#. But generally, transitioning from web apps to mobile apps means that you now have to think about interactions that happen with your mobile phone. So that will be the primary thing. So for example, if you're creating web apps, you have to think about responsiveness, how people navigate the browser, how they use their computer. But with mobile phones, you now have to switch your primary focus on the experience of interacting with your program through the phone. So sometimes people might use Signal, so your app, you can't rely on the connectivity that much. Or for example, people will be mostly using it with 2 fingers. So some interactions will be awkward, or you have to think extra hard about typefaces and stuff.
That is interesting.
Probably a lot of problems will involve maps or like movement, because phones are always carried around. So yeah. And I feel like probably accessibility on the phone is a bit more of an issue, because, depending on the app, like people are much more likely to use your phone, to use your app on the phone when they're stressed or they're in a rush or they have some emergency and they have to do something, than when they're on a laptop. So yeah, there's that.
Jose has pointed out, or maybe it's JS Ager. That is why people often use the distinction between a native mobile app. So
Yes.
Is that when it's actually built for mobile?
Native mobile app refers to you writing it as the mobile app first. So like in Objective-C or Swift or Kotlin or Java.
Proper one.
So yeah, kind of there are reasons why people not do that. Because, for example, if you have an idea for a mobile app and you want to, for example, you want to write another Airbnb. So you have a choice. Do I write basically two applications, one for iOS and one for Android, but there are two different applications that I have to make sure that two teams work the same way and make it look as similar as possible, and the interactions are very similar and so on? Or do I basically try to have this in-between stage, because what this browser allows is that it just creates a shortcut on a phone, but actually there is unified piece of software underneath your browser that makes it look the same, and then you have to have only one team. It's a different set of problems. So, like, for example, it's never going to be as fast as a native mobile app. It's never going to be like Apple, especially, kind of discriminates against non-native apps. It's very kind of, once you've seen a few, it's very easy to spot when an app is native and when it's not. Like, it's just a little bit sharper. It uses, it's a little bit quicker, a little bit sharper, and because Apple just prefers these apps.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, a quick fire round of questions as we're running out of time. Some interesting questions have come in. Gideon, what's the best way to explain Internet of Things? IoT.
I would say it's when your fridge is connected to Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So Internet of Things.
Smart appliances.
Yeah, it's basically like a list of these smart appliances. Yes. It's Internet of Things. It's when there is an outage in a cloud service and you cannot, for example, put your shoes on or something, because your shoes are connected to Wi-Fi and the functionality of doing up the laces has now been turned off because the server is down.
Didn't we have something like that recently? I don't remember what it was.
Usually people kind of spot these things here and there. Like, for example, I think there was like quite high profile, like Tesla cars were not able to open because of AWS outage. Once in London, I missed the train because signals for that line were connected to a cloud provider that went down.
And there's, of course, the one where Facebook locked themselves out because the lock was controlled by their own server, which had gone down.
So yeah, there you go. That's an example of
Also,
Internet of Things. Like, if you connect things to the internet, you do that so there is interactivity. So like, you can do a lot of cool things with Internet of Things. Like, for example, what you can do, if you connect everything to the internet, what you can do is you have a bus lane, and when the bus approaches a junction, then for that bus, the light turns green. So that's a good example of usage of Internet of Things. So the way you make things interact with each other is like, the proximity, everything is very quickly communicating to allow that. So you don't have the whole bus of people standing in, like, waiting for a red light. So that's a good useful usage of it. Yeah.
Wesley is asking, how about AI and hacker-crackable listening devices?
I have no idea what a hacker-crackable listening device is. So I'll just, use my own advice from the beginning of the stream and just ask directly, like, Wesley, what does hacker-crackable listening device mean? What is it? Never heard of that.
Interesting.
Yeah. Cool.
eBay sometimes gets not a number. I've had that one. Can you talk about it? Or is it the same as null?
Not quite. It's kind of a very specific type of error in JavaScript when you are trying to probably convert something that is not a number to a number. and it gives you that error. So when, for example, you're trying to pass int on a string that is a name, it will tell you not a number.
Right. Let's give it a go. Let I'm man equals
Yeah.
So now we want to do pass int
Or float, yeah.
I'm none.
So you need to console log that.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, that's a null as well. Huh. When do you get I'm not a number then? Can't remember now.
I do know that NaN, not a number, its data type is a number.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
But there you go. It's basically to tell you that something is not a number.
I have had that before, and it baffled me. I'm sorry we are not being particularly helpful here, but
Yeah.
just know you're not alone.
Yes.
Yes, brilliant. What does it mean?
Does it compute to an integer or float an integer?
A floating integer is like 1.2.
Interesting. How did JavaScript then compute HGF EW to say null? Well, there you go. So in this case, they're trying to tell you explicitly that the value is nothing. You have tried to pass an int, and it's been nothing.
Interesting. Yes. Well, I think we better wrap it up now.
Yeah.
It's been great having you here, Michael. Thank you for clearing up all those things.
Pleasure.
I've got some news.
Right.
This will be news to you, I think, as well.
Really?
I think so. Because on Friday, we're coding. Yes, our Friday coding sessions. This time, it's our discovery series, and we're discovering React. Woo.
Whoa, with Bob's a roll.
Bob will be joining us.
That is news.
Indeed, yes. Helping us take, not our first steps in React, because we have used React before.
Yes.
But not for a while. So yes, we're going to be building a little app in React.
Yes.
Hope you can join us. If you enjoyed this stream, please consider giving us the thumbs up and maybe subscribing so you don't miss the next one.
No. Yes.
And we mentioned GitHub Desktop. Next week, Treasure is joining me on the Wednesday
there you go.
to talk about GitHub Desktop. Yeah. Looking forward to that. Any closing thoughts, Michael?
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Always good advice. Yes. Well, see you on Friday.
Yes.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Hey.
Bye.